it's a really good time to be alive. It's very easy to lose that in the day-to-day, but there's more and more tools for helping each other and for living a better life and for helping yourself understand what's happening within your body. Between the intervention and therapeutic side and the sensing and diagnostic side, it's just a smorgasbord of things that you can try and adapt for something that will provide more health span and a better outcome for you as a person.
From aching knees to stiff backs, pain is something most of us just live with. But what if you didn't have to? This episode explores how red light therapy is now being used at home to speed up recovery, reduce inflammation, and help people take control of their pain without pills or surgery. Welcome to Hack to Health. Joining me is Forrest Smith, CEO of Kineon, who knows the struggle firsthand and has spent years exploring how red light therapy can make a difference. In this episode, you'll discover how red light therapy taps into your body's natural healing power to ease pain and inflammation, why it stands out compared to traditional treatments, and how it can work for anyone, whether you're an athlete or just tired of discomfort. We'll break down the science, debunk myths, and give you practical steps to try yourself. This isn't just about one solution, it's about empowering you with the knowledge to take charge of your health. So if you're ready to find a new way to tackle pain and feel better, don't miss this. Stick around. This one's for you. Hey, good afternoon, Forrest. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and stoked to be here with you and looking forward to the discussion.
Me too. And this is a discussion that I think a lot of people are obviously aware of when they hear red light therapy. And I think people also don't understand, I guess, why are we all in so much pain in general? Like kind of an obvious question, but I think there's a lot of people that are constantly dealing with pain. Like, can we start there?
Absolutely. I think, it's modern life. It's unfortunate, but there's a number of different environmental factors and dietary factors. And I think the biggest thing, though, is that it's really easy to not move enough. What happens with that is, and I can use myself as an example, I tore my meniscus in my left knee when I was younger. And when you have that kind of traumatic tissue damage, if you're not moving and if you're not kind of staying active, what happened to me was I was very busy up through my mid-30s, and I started showing signs of osteoarthritis, kind of early onset osteoarthritis. And the reason for that is when you have that kind of traumatic tissue damage in a joint, it increases the chronic inflammation that you see in that joint. And that chronic inflammation might not get you today. It's really one of those invidious things that impacts you from a degradation of the tissue over time. And so it's kind of, we compare it to kind of boiling the frog, right? You can set a frog in the warm, lukewarm water and just continue to raise the temperature, and he never jumps out because there's never really kind of a shock from a temperature change standpoint. And so you notice the same thing from inflammation. You just get used to it. I think it's the same thing with the lack of movement that we see. So we deal a lot with kind of, particularly our older users, seeing amazing results just by reducing the inflammation that they've gotten used to over time. So turning the water back down on that boiling frog, as it were, and taking advantage of the technology that's there to be able to do that, because there's not really any other ways of, pharmaceuticals or supplements. You need to have movement and you need to have light therapy to reduce those inflammation markers, and you'll see amazing results if you do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will say, okay, inflammation, we hear about it. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere. But for the average person that may not understand exactly what inflammation is, why is it such a big deal when it comes to pain, recovery? Like, is there a way to break it down in more simple terms? Like, is it all bad, or is there maybe more to the story than we know?
There is more to the story. It's a great question because we tend to wrap everything under inflammation, and it is a little bit lazy, sweeping everything under the inflammation carpet as I do occasionally. But what you really see with inflammation is two types. One is an acute inflammation, which is typically, I've sprained my ankle, my joint needs to be protected, and I need to have growth hormones in that area. And so the swelling and kind of intervention that your body brings to that space is that acute inflammation. And so that's actually not a bad thing for you. And to be honest, with red light therapy and laser therapy, we don't interact with that. We don't really reduce, we actually increase the amount of growth hormones that you see in the area. The more invidious one that again kind of goes back to our boiling frog analogy is the chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is a killer. Again, because there's not really any good ways for you to sense this over time. So in many cases, again, with my meniscus, after I rehabbed it, I thought, hey, I'm ready, I'm good, I'm great to go back in the world. We see the same thing with people with lower back injuries, with neck injuries. It's why it's such kind of the silent killer, is that you're just not really, unless it's kind of paired with pain from degrading the tissue already, and so you've already kind of gone through the first phases of it, you don't really notice this chronic pain, and so you're not really trying to treat it, and it's not triggering what it should do from a response standpoint, if that makes sense. And the big downside for it is that it doesn't stay local. So one of the things that we've seen, and we work with a few different physiologists out of the NFL. It's a big study with Harvard and the NFL a few years ago, and when you take out all of their factors, because there's a lot of different factors you have to take out, 3,500 different players. When you remove all of their factors, the guys who had ACL tears and had that chronic inflammation, even after they've done the rehab, their back end, their training, it's kind of, it's not just the lineman. We've had a lot of questions about this. So, this is washing out all other factors just to the inflammation that is generated. Heart attacks and severe cardiovascular disease were 50% more prevalent in those athletes who'd had an ACL tear and had it repaired. The reason for that is you see that degradation. So with the knee, as an example, an ACL is a very good example. With the knee, the inflammation increases dramatically in your synovial capsule, which is the kind of the joint fluid capsule in your knee. It doesn't stay local to this, though. And so what we see it doing is kind of regionally, what it does is it starts impairing blood flow. So if you look at the guys, the same ACL tear guys, 10 years later, their quads on their injured knee will still be 1 to 1.5 degrees colder, because the leakage of that inflammation, that distribution of inflammation into the region, has impaired the cardiovascular delivery system. And again, that doesn't stay local to that region either. You also see it just generally and systemically with that increase in severe cardiovascular disease. Again, it's really damning, kind of both from an inflammation standpoint, but also from our current pharmaceuticals, which is most of these guys who are trying to treat the inflammation, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, sounds like it would do just that. But in fact, it does the opposite. It actually triggers stiffening of the arteries over time, particularly if you're using it chronically. So the combination of inflammation and then essentially what's the gold standard from the medical community, from the pharmaceutical community these days, which is NSAIDs, the combination of those really increases the systemic risk for mortality and heart disease based on treating exactly how you're told to, which is crazy.
Do many, like, again, NFL, like, I get it, you're speaking my language there, but does the average, like, the medical field, practitioners, MDs, whatever it might be, are they aware of this? It doesn't sound, I've never really hear this being discussed.
We do a lot of education around it. We've actually sat down with the foundational researchers who researched and kind of developed the NSAIDs or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the first place. And their intention was never to have these be general treatment where you take a pill for it. It was always to be kind of localized treatment where you can use kind of either an injection or a transcutaneous method for delivering those drugs, so that you're not having these systemic issues from a cardiovascular standpoint, because they're very aware of this. But what happened is when you start combining or letting this get back towards the commercial aspect of things, pain reduction is a very attractive promise to give someone. And so you say, hey, pain reduction, and we can reduce inflammation. The problem is it's very misleading, this anti-inflammatory drugs kind of approach. The anti-inflammation that you're seeing out of this is really more towards those short-term acute positive inflammatory markers versus the chronic ones. And the chronic ones, they stack negatively with the outcomes that you see from NSAID. So we do a lot of education about this with our medical professional networks, but unfortunately it's not really commonly known. And we see this particularly with our older and boomer style, and I'll put the quotes around that, but like 60 plus users and patients, they trust their doctors. And I don't think there's any kind of crazy conspiracy behind this. The problem is they've got a 70-year-old doctor who went to med school 40 years ago, and when he went to med school, the books were 15 years old. And then so you can see how there's so much inertia that it's really half of our job as a photobiomodulation company is really just presenting the science and saying, guys, look at what this does compared to what the other alternative.
So for red light therapy, though, I think a lot of people think it's new. What I've read is it's maybe has roots in NASA. Sounds obviously very sci-fi. We're seeing it pop up at your sauna. You might have a traditional and an infrared. There's devices, obviously, obviously we'll get into. What are the roots, though, of red light therapy?
It depends on how far back you want to go and what kind of you include. But I would say that of modern photobiomodulation or light therapy, and just to kind of address that as well, there's a few different terms you may hear around light therapy. Photobiomodulation, which is just photo, light, bio, body, modulation, we're going to change it. And so that's essentially the agreed term from the medical research community right now. Before about 2014, there wasn't really an agreed term. So it was low-level laser therapy, it was LED therapy, it was photobiomodulation. But the medical community came around this as there's been a huge amount of research in the space. They need to kind of set terms, and photobiomodulation is what came out of that. But in the 50s, to answer your question, there was the development of the first red laser, a ruby laser. I believe it was a YAG laser, if I remember correctly. Essentially, with this, they were looking at experimenting, and it wasn't on anything from a treatment standpoint, but what they noticed was when they were treating the different lab mice with this, there's a really powerful wound healing and cellular growth impact from using red light and infrared. And so they noticed that the mice that were being treated like this, their wounds were healing faster. They were doing a different focused experiment on this. And I think this was roughly the 60s based on the 50s kind of laser technology. They've noticed that the hair was growing back faster, that the wounds were growing back faster, and so that flagged them to start getting further into the weeds on kind of the research. The NASA piece started in the 80s. There's a really huge amount of oxidative stress and just stress in general that goes into astronauts' bodies, and they come back with a number of different pathologies. Part of it comes back to what we were talking about earlier about movement. When you don't have gravity, it's how you move. You don't get the benefits of just general movement. So, but also there's just a ton of oxidative stress from different radiation levels that you don't have inside the atmosphere. So Whalen and his group started doing trials with NASA they started on plant growth, I believe. And again, same kind of thing. They noticed that there was a knock-on effect for improving outcomes for astronauts from a reduced oxidative stress and inflammation standpoint. And that's gone on to trigger more people coming into it, because NASA has a great name for this. We actually, our physiology team are working with NASA on a couple of different things, because we're still seeing the same issues. There's a very strong protective effect for photobiomodulation transcranially for the brain. And one of the biggest issues with astronauts coming back from space is what they call space brain, which is essentially if Alzheimer's and TBI had a baby, it's really bad. It's really negative impacts on the physiology. But there's a very strong protective effect. So we're working with NASA on being able to test the different dosing profiles for that going forward to help our astronauts kind of avoid this in the future, because I think there's going to be more and more of them going up. Yeah, I think the NASA piece in the 80s really triggered a lot more, and we've seen over 7,000 papers in medical research journals specifically addressing photobiomodulation and a number of different pathologies. So it's great to see it expanding. Every day we see new awesome pathologies. It's just awesome to see that kind of research and be able to have technology contributing something positive back in the world versus stealing our attention and kind of EMF and everything else that are kind of negative impacts.
Yeah, you do hear that, right? I think there's astronauts that were trapped up there for all those weeks. There was I think I heard an analogy of it was like taking 10 cross-country flights a day, what it does to your body.
No, that's exactly it. And the protective and ergogenic effects and if people are taking a lot of flights, we get a lot of frequent flyers who are like, hey, can I use this on my brain? and the data is there for that as well. So yeah, we're actually releasing a brain product next year that's more specifically dosed for transcranial delivery. But even with what we have right now, the Move Plus is actually the 808 nanometer lasers are actually penetrate very effectively for the brain. And so that's something that I do 3 to 4 times a week is now already from a protocol standpoint.
Okay, like preventive, basically?
Yes. So it's preventative for a number of things. One of the things that we're seeing recently, and we've actually filed some grants on, is what they call the microvascular hypothesis of Alzheimer's. Really, the more the scientific community looks into what has been the previous kind of hypothesis for Alzheimer's, which is protein plaques, it doesn't really make sense. They've been able to treat protein plaques very effectively with pharmaceuticals and still don't see any cognitive benefits for people with Alzheimer's. And so what's come about over the last 3 to 5 years is a new hypothesis, which is the neurovascular and kind of microvascular performance in your brain is really what's being impacted by this. And we have a really strong and meaningful impact for dumping nitric oxide in a couple of different different flavors into the brain and improving microvascular performance. And so getting ahead of dementia, getting ahead of Alzheimer's and these full brain dementias that you see occasionally, it's awesome. It's great to see it. There's more and more labs kind of looking into the sensing side of this as well. So kind of pulling data in on how this is impacting it so effectively.
That's incredible. And I think for people listening, they might just want to know, like, okay, how does it actually work? This thing, the red light hits your cells, hits your skin. Can you explain just the process of how that would now translate to less pain overall?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different things that impact pain, but the main mechanisms that we look at with the light in the body are very similar to what you would see for different types of compounds or molecules that you can use, which is we target what light can interact with, which is in the body photoacceptors. And there's a set number of photoacceptors, and these are the only things that interacting with, because we also get a lot of questions of, if light's helping me, why don't I just go sit in the sun? And you can, like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely some good benefits for, 15 to 30 minutes of sunlight every day. The problem with that is that you also introduce things like UVA and UVB that have negative impacts from a DNA and RNA standpoint. So essentially what we're doing is we're targeting these specific photoacceptors, and our technology specifically as Kineon, we spent tens of thousands of hours modeling how many of these photoacceptors exist, where do they exist, at what level of depth, and then how are we delivering photons to them in the most effective way to trigger them for the outcomes that we want to see. And so an example of that, there's really 5 or 6 that move the needle from a physiological standpoint, but one good example that I think most people are relatively aware of is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a carrier molecule in your blood for oxygen, and what we're finding out, though, is it's also a carrier molecule for nitric oxide. There's a big kind of paradigm shift in how we're thinking about our body as a 2-gas system, which used to be kind of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and now is oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitric oxide. And that paradigm shift in how we address that really comes down a lot from a volume standpoint to the hemoglobin. But when we use infrared, we can trigger a release of nitric oxide from that hemoglobin. That nitric oxide comes into the bloodstream and has a number of different positive effects, but one of them is it can be absorbed and is a dilation factor. So if you have an area of your body where you're delivering, for example, like the quads from the NFL guys that we were talking about earlier, delivering blood poorly, you can deliver the blood much more effectively by using the infrared light to trigger these release of nitric oxide. The second piece of that is the binding site on hemoglobin is competitive between nitric oxide and oxygen. So if you release nitric oxide, you can now uptake oxygen more effectively. And so generally the blood vessels kind of enlarging and then more oxygen coming through is a really positive impact on the healing process and then the mitochondrial function of the cell. And there are actually trigger points in the mitochondria, these photoacceptors that we work with there. To answer your question, the main ways that we interact with the body are through these photoacceptors that take on additional electrons and signal differently downstream and increase, again, nitric oxide in the blood, ATP, which is our body's currency of energy inside the cells, reduce oxidative stress. It's just a really powerful trigger point.
And so that can also help with the oxidative stress, obviously, but then the chronic inflammation?
Yes. So with the chronic inflammation, the oxidative stress is a big piece of that. And this goes a little bit in the weeds from a biochemistry standpoint. But when we're targeting, as an example, one of the things that your body does between the mitochondria and then kind of the nucleus of the cells is a lot of signaling back and forth. And that's the area where you see oxidative stress become unhealthy, either too low or too high. And one nice thing about the photobiomodulation is we're actually modulating this up when it's too far down or down when it's too far up. So keeping it within a healthy range. This is called mitochondrial retrograde signaling. And essentially what we're doing is the same type of photon delivery, but instead of hemoglobin, it's going into an enzyme in the electron transport chain, which is essentially kind of an energy generation step, a 4-phase energy generation piece of the mitochondria. So we trigger this cytochrome C oxidase, which is a blocking point, a bottleneck of energy production in the mitochondria to operate more quickly. And what you see from that is when the cell is generating energy more healthily, the signaling downstream from an oxidative stress standpoint levels out. And that's one of the biggest ways that we impact the oxidative stress, and then the knock-on effects of that are the inflammation reduction.
Got it. Okay. So I myself, others listening have seen red light therapy devices out there. And obviously you're explaining extremely eloquently like what your product does, but how would someone understand how Kinian stands apart from whatever competitor you might have? Like how do they set apart like what your device does that others may not do?
It's a great question. I think that the short answer to that is we use techniques for dosing that are substantially more complex but more accurate for how we can deliver photons to the exact right place in the exact right volume. And the more kind of in-depth answer for that is there's very good models coming from sensing companies. So for a long time, there have been sensing companies out there using plethysmography, which is a way of shooting lasers or light of some sort into the body and then sensing with photodiodes the reflection and refraction of that light and building a map for, as an example, blood oxygenation. So total hemoglobin, oxygenated and deoxygenated, because they reflect the light differently. And so they're in the body on such a scale that it's given us a framework for modeling how we want to deliver light. And so I would say how a simple panel version of this does it is, hey, we're putting out this much light. You're going to be taking in this much light. The kind of middle of the road, kind of the middle of the spectrum for the complexity for this is companies who are modeling it and saying, we're emitting this much light at the skin surface, and this is how much optical power density needs to go into the system to be able to move the needle. What we're doing is just taking it and breaking it down to a much higher resolution and essentially standing on the shoulders of giants who have done great work from a sensing standpoint, building these much more complex models and then mapping those back against real world testing. And so what does real world testing look like? Because what will happen is we build these mathematical models and we expect this, and then we test that and we go, why is that so far apart? And so we've been through about 37 cycles of that now. But those tests are things like serum nitric oxide, which is just how much nitric oxide is in your blood. And like we were just talking about, we release a lot of nitric oxide, so we have an expectation, all right, how much hemoglobin was there? How much are we triggering? Did we put the right level of photons in there? And the models tell us this, and then we look at the reality and we go, this is different. How do we go back and fix our model? And so after 37 times of fixing our model, we're pretty accurate at it. But that's the difference between what we do and what other companies in the space do. And it comes down to our kind of approach of start from the result you want and work backwards. And I think not to knock anyone else's product, it's great to see a lot of panels out there and people getting introduced into the technology. And whenever you have a new technology come in, the Gen 1 of things is going to be more kind of factory and product focused versus user and outcomes focused. And I can't think of anything that's kind of more factory focused than just a big PCB full of LEDs that goes into a box and you put on someone. The only downside for that relative to the outcomes is that dosing is very important. Dosing drives all of the outcomes from photobiomodulation, and the panel version of this is kind of like your doctor saying, hey, take these pills, and no, I'm not going to tell you one or two or three of those. Just shake the bottle in front of your face until something falls in, and whatever falls in will be kind of okay, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it totally does make sense. So you're saying like there's panels we might see it, but when you go to your sauna, like a sauna spa type of atmosphere, go lay in the bed kind of thing and just hit everything at once.
That's right. And it's nothing against it. It's, there's always got to be kind of a Gen 1 product, but what we've tried to do with our science and physiology team is really justify we're a mission-driven company, and our mission is to increase the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most measurable way we can. So we really measure hard and then try to come back, and whatever it takes, whether it's we had a question of should we have lasers in our it's going to be higher cost and more sophistication to develop and more FDA regulatory. But with our testing, what's come out of that is it makes a massive difference from an outcomes for our users. And that's our North Star is if it's making a better outcome for our users, that's the path we're going to go. And regardless of the cost or the regulatory or the complexity, we can make it happen. We just have to find what works best and measure that.
Yeah, and then we've discussed, athletes, NASA, astronauts. Who else could benefit from? Could it be people that maybe are not experiencing any pain that they want to just, like you said, be preventative? I've read or I've seen, I think, dermatologists have these devices in their office, like the older school ones, of course. But who else can really benefit from this technology?
So definitely dermatologists. We see a number of different applications. We're essentially hardware guys, and we interact with a lot of different kind of medical professionals around this. So orthodontists and dentists. So if you have TMJ, or if you've recently had a wisdom tooth pulled, or if you have braces on. I had braces recently, and you have a lot of soft tissue in your mouth. So the ligaments and kind of the soft tissue part of what holds your mouth together actually regenerates and grows at a faster rate. So you see people getting out of their braces or their kind of Invisaligns and these type of things. If they treat for 15 minutes a day, they get out of those 40% faster. Your teeth and the soft tissue just regenerates at a much better rate. We see this similar thing for wound healing and longevity. So there's a lot of people doing products for skin health. You do see an increase in fibroblasts and type 2 collagen proliferation and a reduction in wrinkles. And people just have healthier skin and healthier tissue because of this. So using for skin is great. Personally, my favorite thing to do is, we started this as a protocol with a Japanese lab from a testing standpoint. They developed a protocol called the proximal priority therapy. And essentially, the idea was to test within our teams and their teams to see how this was working. And what you do is you target the largest blood vessels. So we interact with blood very effectively. Let's target the largest blood vessels in our body that are closest to the skin. So put this on your neck, and I'll show you.
I was going to say, yeah, it'd be great to see, obviously people listening as well.
So I started this a year ago with the idea that, we're going to do it for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. And after 2 weeks, I felt such a lift in my mood and such a lift in kind of my energy on a daily basis that I haven't stopped it since then. And I have a hard time keeping the kind of ongoing habits just because of the nature of startup life. But yeah, this is our device that I'm putting on my neck here. So vertical pieces over the largest, your aorta and your carotid there, to get the largest blood vessels in your body that are most accessible from the skin level. The second piece of this, so 15 minutes like this, and then the second piece that I think drives a lot of the outcomes that I've seen from it, which again is mood lift, energy lift, and then I don't get sick anymore. My kids, I got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they drag in stuff from school all the time, and I used to just go through the entire house, and I don't get sick. I haven't been sick in a year. Food poisoning, something like this, yes, but like nothing like normal colds I'm just done with, which is kind of crazy outcome. But
That is crazy.
I pull these as tight as possible, and I apply it to my gut, my lower abdomen, about an inch below my navel. And so I do that 15 minutes, and I do my neck 15 minutes, and I feel, again, just the research term for this, and one of the reasons why we were targeting it with the lab in the first place, is called affect. And there's a couple of different theories as to why you see this lift in affect, which is so consistent from the number of people who are doing this protocol. But one of the biggest one is so many of your neurotransmitters and so much of the bulk of the neurotransmitter generation is in your gut. And what we see is a huge lift in neurotransmitters. And some of these don't kind of cross the blood-brain barrier, but you also see a lift in the brain without even treating the brain. So there's still kind of working on why this works so well. Right now we have the ABC of like how to dose it, and the XYZ of like this is really moving the needle for immune health, for affect. But they're still kind of putting together the science on exactly why.
So it's 15 minutes neck, 15 minutes abdomen, and that's
right.
7 days a week?
I do it 7 days a week, and it's also gotten me. I was using the product essentially for my lower back. I'm a tall CrossFitter, so my lower back is never happy, and and my old knee injury, I was using it just for those. And then again, we've been looking at a number of different things and bringing out our own brain devices. Brain and gut really pair very well also. And this protocol development was part of that program from a research standpoint. And I've seen such a good kind of outcome for it. The one thing that we've been testing recently that might be interesting for you as well is methylene blue is also a goodness, easier for me to say, not synthesizer, sensitizer. And so you actually see a really powerful outcome increase with treating the neck and brain and gut. Add in the methylene blue as well.
Okay, that's I'm in. How about, like, obviously everyone's different. You have the former tear, you had braces. There's a lot of different factors going on with everybody, and age and things that they ignored, whatever it might be. But for maybe an average, if this is even possible, when are you starting to see a difference? Is it days, weeks, months?
So if you have, it depends on the pathology. I will say, I'll start from the worst, kind of longest outcomes we see, because my mother's still giving me a hard time about this. She had osteoarthritis of the hands and wanted to love the product and wanted to tell us like good things about it, but also wanted to be honest. And it was just not for about 5 weeks or 6 weeks, not seeing results, which with other parts of the body, we just don't see. We don't see it taking that long. But with the hands, it takes about 2 months. So if you have osteoarthritis of the hands, It really works, but there's only a limited amount of tissue for us to interact with there. And so the outcomes just take a long time. And we try to be very upfront about the expectation levels and the promises that we make, because again, we're trying to help people make the commitment to do what it takes to move the needle from quality of life standpoint. With large joints like shoulders, hips, knees, we see very fast and very thorough outcomes. So if you have pain in the knee based on inflammation, I will say, I have to put that caveat in there. When it's inflammation-based pain, the outcomes and the needle move is very fast. Occasionally, we have people with sciatica, for example, and there's a mechanical or kind of mechanistic problem with their skeletal or musculoskeletal system. We're not going to help with that as much. We can help reduce the inflammation that causes, but oftentimes we actually ended up developing a new product based on this because we wanted to give the best results possible. But we have a product now for myofascial release that actually helps solve that, because that kept coming up so often that with sciatica, we'd see like, guys, we really can't do much for this. And they're like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And so we've gone through 16 different prototypes to get to this, which is a really, really effective and useful myofascial release product. But that's kind of outside the scope of the photobiomodulation discussion. But yeah, that's the, the larger the joint, the more faster we see the outcomes. For me, with the proximal priority therapy on the neck and lower gut, it took 10 days. I didn't notice any major changes for 10 days. And again, there's a number of different theories that have been floated as to why this is working so well. One of them is that there's a lot of omics studies around this. So metabolomics is one of them, where you see an increase in butyrate, which is a really nice thing to see in your gut. You also see a shift in the gut microbiome populations and towards a healthier kind of population in the gut. Personally, I don't see either of those moving the needle the way that I had a sense of it within the 10 days. But again, the jury's out on the mediating factors for it, but the double-blind studies and the RCTs on this from the outcomes are kind of unequivocal.
Wow. So when you work with, let's take a dermatologist, for example, are they using this for other things like acne, eczema, psoriasis? Like, is it effective in those capacities as well?
With psoriasis, yes. With acne, our device wouldn't be as much use. It can reduce the inflammation that the acne triggers, but typically blue or kind of deep blue, royal blue, are used more effectively with acne. We've had some questions as, can we build that in? And it's not really within our scope for the current product. But again, the skin health in general, so reduced inflammation, higher levels of type 2 collagen, faster growth of a kind of younger looking skin with additional kind of proliferation of fibroblasts, which are kind of the fast growing front end of the cellular growth for your skin. Those are all really well documented, but they are treating psoriasis with this quite effectively. Yeah, acne unfortunately is not within our kind of domain.
That's just from the neck and the abdomen every day, 15 minutes each. That's incredible. Is there anyone that is not for? Someone who's going through chemo? Are there people that this is not suitable for?
So the chemo is a great question. One of the things that it has been used for with chemo is mucosal lining, both in your mouth and your stomach, gets disrupted very heavily by chemo. And for treating that, it's been cleared by the FDA some time ago. It's a very effective use for this. One of the things that's been kind of contraindicated for it until recently is cancer, because the assumption was this is actually increasing the level of energy that's generated by the cells. If we're doing that to cancer, this is really going to mess people up. What we found is the exact opposite. And it hasn't really come up in the research very clearly until about the past 3 years. But we expect that contraindication to be removed likely in the next couple of years. Government organizations are not really leading edge.
No, I get it.
And then the other one that's kind of an odd one from contraindication, that we have limitations from the FDA as an FDA cleared device. One of the stranger ones is pregnancy, because we it's contraindicated, but there's not really any justification as to why. There haven't been any studies showing risk for this. And actually we have a number of different patients who have had C-sections, and then they use this kind of post-pregnancy to recover. And so C-section, and then just the general kind of tissue around either the C-section or the uterine lining and this type of thing recover and become healthier much, much faster when you can treat them. And the same thing with the kind of stretch marks. You can actually reduce the impact of stretch marks longer term and have healthier tissue there versus kind of slightly stiffer scar tissue. It makes it more, the infrared in particular actually triggers it to be a little bit closer to the original tissue versus the scar tissue.
Got it. Yeah, well, I guess we could go off on a whole side chain about what they approve for pregnancy, and you can take this vaccine or this baby formula once your baby comes out. How about like, do you need a diagnosis first? Like someone who might say, "Oh, okay, I'm feeling some pain. I'm feeling it might be inflammation. I injured something," or is it something? Can you just kind of jump right in and say, "All right, let's just give it a shot and see. Maybe I don't need to go to anyone. I can manage it this way."
You can jump right in, but we have over 500. We just started a program really kind of the end of the last year. We have over 500 medical professionals now prescribing this and working with patients with it out of their clinics. And we've found that, particularly with our older users, they don't like hearing the science about it. They don't like being targeted with additional information about it. They're going to get the best outcomes. And in general, the older users see really powerful impacts for this and how they can get back into movement and reduce their joint pain and just impacting all over their life. But they're also the hardest ones to talk to about it, because when we start talking to them about biochemistry, they're just like, no, this isn't like, but what they do is they trust their doctor. And so we work on education. We have a big program that's expanding out this year on educating more of the clinicians and physicians that we work with to understand kind of the basics of the biochemistry, and so that they actually interact with their patients quite a lot, and they know how to do that, where we're still kind of learning how to educate people on this, and maybe a little bit too technical and in the weeds on the details. The physicians really understand how to interact with their patients and make them comfortable with it, and we've just seen amazing results for both the physicians who are recommending this and prescribing it to their patients, but also the patients who come back and are like, why did I know about this in the first place? Well, it's the older guys, and it makes sense. They get targeted by a lot of kind of more cynical and kind of not very ethical types of treatments. And so they have to protect themselves. And you can see why systemically they have that thick skin or shell for the pitches. But it's just great to see them actually adopting it. And we found the way to do that through the physician networks.
Yeah, it's true. But like, what about people that just say, okay, I'm just getting older, or, is there like any myth to bust about pain in general that you wish more people knew is true? It's you're always going to need medication, or just rest more, whatever it might be. Is there a myth out there that you want to sort of dispel?
So I think the approach that we've taken personally at our house, my family, is that you kind of rage against the dying of the light. You don't have to get old. There's a number of different things you can do from a training standpoint. The technology is starting to support this. The supplement, the education about the different things that you can eat. And we know that now. So I'm in my mid 40s. I've got to start building on more muscle because I'm going to start seeing sarcopenia in 10 years. So let's start doing that. Let's take a proactive approach, where I think in the past people have seen, I'm 40 years old, my knee's just going to hurt. I'm 50 years old, my knee's just going to hurt. Now you have choices, you have options, you have empowerment, you have technology that you can apply to this and really take back some of what technology has taken from us. And that's what we try to do, is allow and empower people to get back into movement is the main thing, because you see that impacting people's kind of trajectory so much. And the boiling the frog analogy is the right thing for it, because you just, this week I got to work. I'm on 50-hour week. I'm not going to get my training done, and my knee's hurting, and I'm not going to walk as much. And you just see that kind of going down. And there's a tipping point at which, when you stop moving and you're below that point, you're essentially on a mortality curve now. And how that tends to operate from user experience or from patient experience is, when you're not moving as much, your joints start displaying more osteoarthritis. You can't move as much, and so you have this downward spiral for the movement of your life, kind of just day by day going away. What that triggers is falls, which is a really kind of near-term mortality red flag for older patients. And, again, one of the best things for us that we see on a daily basis is these testimonials where people reverse that, where they say, hey, I couldn't even walk up the stairs. Now I'm doing my 2 miles a day. You can see their mortality curve building out, and not just their mortality curve, they're going to live longer. They're going to live healthier. They're going to enjoy those years more. They're going to be more active in the years they have. And so for me, that's why we started the company in the first place. And that's why it's a mission-driven company versus really kind of, we've built companies before for exit and this type of thing. But when you build for mission and you hold yourself accountable to what's measurable for that, this is what comes back out of it. And that's what keeps our team so excited on a daily basis. It's just delivering these these insanely good experiences, particularly for me, the exciting, it's great to work with the NFL, but delivering these experiences for our older users, I couldn't be more excited about anything than that. Like great, we're with the MLB, the PGA. These are all people I looked up to my entire life. It's just great world-class athletes. It's so exciting, but the real target for us and the real kind of the gratitude that I have on a daily basis to be able to do this work is what we deliver for our older patients.
Yeah, the health span, right? Just improving their day to day. And speaking of day to day, how would you sort of clarify that for people listening? Taking control of their health. You talk about empowering people to do that. Is it consistency, awareness, listening to your body? Is there a system that you put in place and just kind of live by it each day?
Personally, I think of it as N of one. Take yourself as a study sample. Not everything is going to work for everyone. Even if it works for 90% of the population, and this medical trial, based on that, says it's great, test on yourself, keep your notes, and then adopt things over time that work for you. And as you start to scale those up and build habits around those, you really, year by year, see a massive impact on, again, the level of functionality of the body. So what's your aerobic capacity? What's your anaerobic capacity? How strong are you? What's your grip strength? All of these things are great to measure, but if you're not kind of making those trials or tests or hypotheses about yourself and then keeping notes on it, then you'll do one today and you'll shift to one tomorrow. Just start stacking them. Take it, build yourself a life of habits that have stacked together to create more opportunity for you from a health span standpoint is my advice. And again, I might be a little quirky and unusual in how we address that, but I think it's not bad advice in general.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I think looking at the technology, obviously you're at the forefront. You're working with some of the biggest names in the world, organizations as well, and constantly innovating. This is, for me, a perfect question for you. Like, where do you see this technology going next? Like, are we going to see this as normal as maybe an electric toothbrush, or where do you think this goes from here?
I think it will be as normal as an electric toothbrush. We're taking the idea that if we continue to reduce the cost and provide better outcomes, that people will adopt this and the education will catch up. I'll show you one of the ones that we're working on. This is a little bit behind the scenes, but I think these new pucks have 4 wavelengths of lasers in them, and we have an entirely new dosing mechanism that we can drive those with. So those are super exciting. Those will be for gut and brain. And also we're finding that if we change the dosing, we can also use these for things like female pathologies, like endometriosis or dysmenorrhea, period pain, polycystic ovarian syndrome. All of these are things that we can treat. Perimenopause, so all of those plus the fact that you can actually treat thyroid and increase thyroid function when you have Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism. There's a number of different things that we're finding from the literature, and we're going to be kind of supporting rollouts for these with best-in-class laser therapy and devices that will really kind of meet what people need and provide them outcomes that they can't get from anything else from a technology standpoint. So I think that's a really exciting path for us on this. Longer term, what we see as the driver for, I guess, kind of owning the category and providing the very best outcomes we can is integrating sensors. As an example for this, we work with things like functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is kind of like having your own wearable MRI that targets different kind of sensing, but it's the same type of thing where we can put this on someone's head and we can see functional blood oxygenation and blood flow, cerebral blood flow, mitochondrial function in different areas of the brain. And when you can see that in different areas of the brain, you can actually map different pathologies back against the outcomes. And so as an example, if you have an impairment in kind of the prefrontal cortex, you'll see higher rates of anxiety, addiction, depression, and you can actually treat those directly. So mapping real-time imaging back into photobiomodulation is what we've been working on for some time, and we'll be launching some products around next year. But I think the main thing is just build as much value into people's lives as you can. And we approach that piece of it kind of in an industrial engineering way. One of the things that we kind of use as an analogy is if you have poor quality products coming out of a factory, you don't go fix the products. You go fix a system that built them. And so one of the things that we kind of disagree with, kind of the standard approach for this is right now, drug companies are looking at these broken products from downstream. And so we're looking at pathologies, and treating those pathologies is just like fixing a broken product. we don't want to fix the product. We want to start targeting the upstream system that built that product. And that's our approach really kind of systemically throughout what we're building, whether it's sensors or lasers or anything else that you'll see from us is really how do we target this? And there's some awesome technology that's democratizing these approaches. The biological knowledge graphs that only billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies could use to target different drug development areas and systems. It's now with large language models something that we can do. And so, we'll be bringing out over the coming years supplements that work synergistically with the laser therapy and can target and provide even better outcomes. So there's a lot to be said for this, for what's coming in the future. But I think the main takeaway is it's a really good time to be alive. It's very easy to lose that in the day to day, but there's more and more tools for helping each other and for living a better life and for helping yourself understand what's happening within your body. And between the intervention and therapeutic side and the sensing and diagnostic side, it's just a smorgasbord of things that you can try and adapt for something that will provide more health span and a better outcome for you as a person.
Yeah, you can tell your enthusiasm and obviously knowledge behind the technology. When someone orders this, right, is it one setting? Do they just put it on neck and abdomen? Is it one, or is there an adjustment for depending on how much you want?
So we started with adjustable, and we found that it was like people don't want complexity. They want it as easy as possible. We do offer some level of adjustability in our new products that are coming out for our research partners, because the research partners need that. They have different kind of dosing models and things that they want to test, and we're providing them with a way that's more of a Swiss Army knife than anything that exists right now for being able to create good dosing protocols and patterns. Yeah, with our user-facing ones, we don't do that anymore. You have to have your PhD to get those editable ones.
I gotcha. So no, this has been really fun talking with you, man. I learned so much. I think this is an episode people are going to want to go back and listen to again, because you just literally dropped so much. It was just like taking 10 different science classes at once. So it was very, very, very beneficial to me and for people listening. So if people want to connect with you, learn more about Kinian, what's the best place to go?
Reach out to me directly, Forrest with 2 R's at Kineon, Kineon.io. Our website has a ton of blog information that we've created to help educate on different subjects around this, or follow us on Instagram, Kineon, Kineon_labs, because we kind of consider ourselves a real world lab for testing and kind of upgrading technology that's going to help people.
Yeah, man, this was awesome. Thank you so much just for your time and for explaining that to everyone. I'm sure everyone wants to go out and get one of these. So Kineon.io to buy, and Kinian_labs for your Instagram. I'll make sure they're in the show notes. But very nice to meet you, and thanks for your time again.
Likewise. What a great discussion. Thank you so much, Joe.